Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We respect your time here. We want to get right to those aha moments, right? Those
Yep.
big takeaways, you know, without overwhelming you with too much info.
Yeah, we get it. You want the core insights. Maybe you're facing a challenge. Maybe you just want a new way to see things. Or hey, maybe you just like to learn.
So today we're diving into Stoicism. I think it's fair to say that for a lot of people, it seems like a really, really old philosophy, right?
Yeah,
But it's actually super relevant even today, even in the modern world.
absolutely. And to help us with this dive, you gave us The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman. Really great book. And what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on, how to use Stoicism, how to actually apply it to the problems and the challenges that you're facing in your life today.
And yeah, I think what's really cool is just how modern it feels. Like the Daily Stoic makes this point really well. This isn't just a bunch of old dusty sayings. It's like real advice, real wisdom for how to think clearly, how to manage your emotions, how to be strong in the face of, whatever life throws at you.
And like the book kind of lays out, we're probably going to end up talking about those three Stoic disciplines, right? The discipline of perception, the discipline of action, the discipline of will.
So yeah, let's jump into this. So this whole idea of focus and control, right?
Yeah.
This is like a huge thing in Stoicism. The Daily Stoic really drives this point home. And it's about, okay, what can you actually control in your life? And what do you just have to accept, right? What's totally outside of your hands?
And it's interesting, right? Because this reminds me of, the serenity prayer. Accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a really nice way to sum up the Stoic approach. Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation, I'm sure you have, where you just felt totally powerless, Like things are happening to you, you can't do anything about it. That's where Stoicism comes in. It helps you find your power again, helps you figure out where you can actually make a difference.
Exactly. And Epictetus, he just comes right out and says it. He says, they can control the choices they make right now. I mean, how powerful is that? Especially when you're feeling overwhelmed, right? You got a million things going on. It's a reminder that you always have control over how you respond right here, right now, in this moment.
And if you want to zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, Marcus Aurelius gives us what the book calls the big three, right? Certainty of judgment, action for the common good, and gratitude. And these are things you can practice, You can work on this every day. It helps you ground yourself. It helps you focus on what matters.
And Epictetus talks about this too, right? About how all the stuff that happens to us, all the external stuff, it's basically neutral. He calls it raw material. It's not the stuff itself that's good or bad.
Yeah.
It's how we choose to see it,
Mm-hmm.
It's the judgments we make. And that's a big deal. It makes you think twice about how you're seeing things, which I know is something you're interested in, right? Like looking at things from different angles.
100%. Stoicism teaches us that good and evil, they're not out there in the world, waiting to happen to us. They come from inside us. They come from how we react. And Epictetus, he says that the only way to find peace, true peace, is to let go of everything outside of your control. Let go of trying to control the things you can't control and focus on what you can, which is your own choices and your own actions.
Okay, so that's focus and control, right? Big idea. Now let's talk about managing emotions. I mean, you're someone who, is looking for ways to not get overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
Find that inner peace. Well, the Stoics, they were all about that. They had some incredible insights into how our emotions work.
And they had really interesting ideas about negative emotions, like anger. Marcus Aurelius, he said straight up, it isn't manly to be enraged. And what he meant was gentleness and civility, being calm, that's real strength. And that's more in line with, what it means to be human. And I think for someone who's trying to, not get swept away by their emotions, that's a really powerful idea, a huge shift in perspective.
Yeah. And, the book uses that example of Joe Louis, the boxer, right? They called him the ring robot. And it wasn't because he was aggressive, It was because he was so calm, so in control. It was actually more intimidating that way. It just shows you, how important it is to stay level-headed, especially when things get tough.
And it's connected to this concept that Epictetus talks about, the invincible person. And what he meant was someone who can't be upset by anything outside of their own choices. It's not about never feeling anything. It's about understanding where those feelings come from and not letting the outside world control how you feel inside. It's about, mastering your reactions to those emotions.
And it's interesting because they talk about pleasure too,
Mm-hmm.
like even good things, if you're not careful, they can actually cause suffering. Seneca warns us about this,
Yeah.
but getting carried away by pleasure says you got to think about the long term, like what are the consequences? What might you regret later on?
It's like, you can have too much of a good thing. It's about balance, right? And Epictetus, he uses this great metaphor. He says, imagine life as a banquet. Don't be the person who's like reaching across the table, grabbing stuff that's not meant for them. Be patient, Take a reasonable amount of what's offered to you and enjoy it. Wait your turn. It's about contentment, right?
Yeah.
Not always wanting more and more.
And there's that quote from Diogenes too, right? The philosopher. He said, "It is the privilege of the gods to want nothing, and of godlike men to want little." And that really gets to the heart of Stoic freedom, right? Like, if you don't want a lot of things, then fewer things have power over you. You're less likely to get upset when you don't get what you want.
And that's a huge point, right? Because the Stoics, they knew that, things happen. Stuff happens in life. It's not the stuff itself that makes you angry or sad or whatever. It's how you think about it. Marcus Aurelius, he puts it this way. You shouldn't give circumstances the power to rouse anger, for they don't care at all. It's not the event, it's your judgment about the event that triggers your emotions.
And Epictetus takes it even further. He says that the harm doesn't come from the person who's like doing something bad to you. The harm comes from your own beliefs about it. It's a totally different way of looking at things. Like, if you can change how you see a situation, you can actually change how much power it has over you. Think about it, someone cuts you off in traffic. Most people, they get angry, right? But a Stoic, they might recognize that anger is a choice, and they can choose to react differently.
So moving on, we've talked about focus and control. We've talked about managing emotions. Now let's talk about self-awareness and taking the right actions, Epictetus says, an important place to begin in philosophy is this: a clear perception of one's own ruling principle. So basically, you got to know yourself. You got to understand what your values are, what drives you. It's about self-reflection.
Yeah, and he also talks about this idea of like external disintegration, right? That if you don't have this strong sense of self, if you're not internally integrated, then the world can basically tear you apart.
And connecting that back to freedom, that thing we were talking about earlier, Epictetus says a free person is someone who lives the way they want to. They're not held back. No one's forcing them. Nothing blocks their choices and their desires are fulfilled. And this is not about, political freedom or anything like that. It's about being free inside yourself. Knowing yourself and acting in a way that's true to who you are, that should resonate with you, right? The need for clear structures and actionable steps.
Totally. And Seneca talks about this too, right? He calls it self-imposed slavery. Like, how often do we let ourselves be controlled by things outside of us, by wanting stuff, by wanting status, by wanting people to like us? The Stoics are saying true freedom, real freedom, comes from within.
And it's really interesting how they were, how they were skeptical about taking things at face value, right? Like, they didn't just trust their senses. They questioned everything. There's this great quote in the book from Heraclitus where he says, I cite a lying sense. So even what you see, what seems obvious, you can't always trust it. And that ties into what we were talking about earlier about seeing things from multiple perspectives. Don't just assume you know the truth. Question everything.
And Epictetus warns about, handing over our minds to anyone who comes along. Like, don't just consume whatever's thrown at you. Don't just absorb everyone else's opinions without thinking for yourself. Especially today, right? I mean, we're bombarded with information all the time.
Right. You got it. You got to be careful, about who you listen to, who you let influence you. Both Epictetus and Goethe, they talk about this in the book. They say, choose your friends carefully, choose your influences carefully, surround yourself with people who lift you up, who help you grow.
And this concept of hypolepsis, it's super important here. The book explains it as, taking up perceptions and judgments. Basically, it means that, yes, stuff happens, but you choose how you react to it. It's not just the external stuff that causes you stress. It's how you're thinking about it, how you're judging it.
Exactly. And this leads to this really profound Stoic idea, which is nothing outside of your reasoned choice is inherently good or bad. Let things happen. Accept them. Go with the flow. Follow events rather than trying to lead them, as the Stoics say.
Marcus Aurelius, he was a master of this, right?
Yeah.
He said that he might wish to be free from hardship, but if it comes, he wants the strength to deal with it, not for it to just go away. It's about building resilience, being ready for whatever life throws your way.
And true education, Epictetus says, is about so much more than just knowing a bunch of facts. It's about learning to apply our natural preconceptions to the right things according to nature, and beyond that, to separate the things that lie within our power from those that don't. So, it's about knowing what you can control and what you can't, and using that knowledge to make good decisions.
In Diogenes, he makes this really sharp observation. He says, we often sell things of great value for things of very little. It's like we trade what's truly important for stuff that doesn't really matter in the end. I think that's something worth thinking about.
Right. Yeah.
What are you giving up for what?
Yeah, and Seneca, he makes his point about living intentionally. Having a plan. He says, life without a design is erratic. You got to have some guiding principles, You got to know what you're aiming for. Otherwise, you're just going to be all over the place. It's about living with purpose.
Yeah. And Epictetus, he warns against doing things just to impress other people, like trying to look good, trying to get validation. He says, be a philosopher in your actions. Don't just talk the talk, walk the walk.
Seneca talks about this feeling of being deceived and divided, like we have all these desires, these wants, and sometimes they conflict with each other. He's saying you got to figure out what you really want, what's truly important to you. Otherwise, you're just going to end up working against yourself.
And one of the biggest things in terms of self-awareness is challenging your own biases, right? Like Epictetus says, we all have these preconceived notions, these ways of seeing the world, and they can really mess with your judgment. You got to question everything. You got to question yourself.
Marcus Aurelius, he just nails it when he says, it isn't events themselves that disturb people, but only their judgments about them. Like the Stoics, they understood that so much of our suffering comes from how we think about things, not from the things themselves.
Yeah, and he gives some really practical advice too, Like don't be resentful, don't be selfish, don't talk too much, be self-reliant, get things done, be positive. I mean, that's good advice for anyone, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to, get stuff done and be efficient with your time.
And there's this idea in the book that the book talks about like the taxes of life, right? And they're not just talking about money. They're talking about like the costs that come with everything, the trade-offs. Like you might achieve something great, but it might come with a lot of stress. It makes you think, what are you willing to pay for what?
And the Stoics, they were big on observing cause and effect. Marcus Aurelius talks about this, and so does Albert Ellis, who came later. It's like, don't just jump to conclusions. Watch what happens. See how things unfold.
And then let go of your judgments about it, Let things just be. Just observe. Don't get caught up in all your opinions and interpretations. Just see things clearly for what they are.
And they make this distinction between, the stuff that the world tells you is important, like possessions, status, all that. They call those external goods. And they say, those things are fleeting, they don't last. What really matters are the virtues, the qualities you develop inside yourself. Things like wisdom, self-control, justice, courage. Those are the things that truly matter.
And Marcus Aurelius, he warns us about like letting our attention wander, getting distracted. Even small lapses in focus, they can add up over time. And he was also really big on being humble. He said he was willing to change his mind if someone showed him he was wrong. It's about the truth. It's not about being right all the time.
And the Stoics, they look to nature a lot for inspiration. Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, they talk about this. Like, if you're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, step back. Look at the big picture. Look at the universe. It puts things in perspective, right?
And Epictetus, he encourages us to question those, those unspoken rules, those invisible scripts that we all follow without even realizing it. Figure out what you really believe. Think for yourself.
And in the end, Musonius Rufus, he sums it all up beautifully. He says the point of philosophy is to actually live it. It's not just about ideas. It's about putting those ideas into action. It's about how you live your life.
So, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about focusing on what you can control, managing your emotions, being self-aware, and acting with virtue. Those are the big takeaways from Stoicism.
And what's really cool is that it's not just theory, right? It's actually a set of tools that you can use. You can apply these ideas to your life today, and it can really help you. Help you deal with stress, help you make better decisions, help you find more peace.
So here's a little something to think about, as you go about your day. Think about one area of your life, one specific area where you've been focusing on things you can't control. Maybe you're worried about something you can't change. Maybe you're trying to force something to happen. Think about that area and then ask yourself, okay, how can I use these Stoic principles, these ideas we talked about? How can I use those to see things differently? And how can I use them to take action? How can I shift my focus to what I can control? It's a powerful question. It can really change things.
Awesome stuff. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.